Welcome back, everyone. You are in for a real treat. We have our president of Ally Invest, Lule Demmissie. She is going to be interviewing Anna N'Jie Konte from Dare to Dream. She's the founder there, and they are going to talk about combating the wealth gap head on. What a timely topic in the environment that we're operating in. Remember, before I turn the show over to them, just remember to ask questions in the chat box. Again, you guys have been wonderful, very chatty throughout the whole day. Keep it up. These two lovely ladies are going to answer your questions live at the end of their fireside chat. So without further ado, Lule, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. I hope you've been enjoying that phenomenal job our teams have been doing to try to break down investing and the basics. This afternoon, we wanted to give it a slightly different tinge and kind of talk about what's in the now right now, which is how to broaden the investment conversation so that people who are not traditionally taking part in the markets and in the benefits of what investing can do and wealth management can do for them in helping them sort of close that gap, right? We will talk a little bit about statistics. I'm supercharged and excited to have Anna N'Jie Konte with us. And she's obviously going to correct my pronunciation of her name. As a person whose name is Lule Demmissie, I know how that goes. But we're excited. She's a renowned financial advisor and doing some really interesting things in specific segments of our society that really have not been as included in the wealth conversation, and how to bring those stories in, and not only looking at the statistics around it, but really also just bringing in the stories and the know-how that comes with it, so that the investing conversation broadens out for many instead of few. So I'm excited to have you with us, Anna.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be really fun.
Fantastic. Now, let's start off with, and by the way, everybody, ask your questions as we go along, and I'll pepper in my own questions with anything that folks have ask us as we stream as well. Anna, tell us a little bit, get started with, who you are, what your business mission is, and what really sort of drives your ability to bring wealth and to individuals who are not included typically.
Yeah. So thanks again for having me here. So I'm the founder of Dare to Dream Financial Planning, which is a comprehensive financial planning firm that focuses on millennials of color, and specifically women, because they have a soft spot in my heart. And I founded my firm late last year with the mission of bringing an understanding and a more nuanced approach to wealth management that applied to Black and Brown communities nationwide.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up? What brought you to this?
So I grew up in New York City. I'm first generation American. So my dad is from the Gambia and my mom is from Puerto Rico. And so, I grew up like very solidly middle class, but without a very good understanding of finances and how to manage my finances and how to create financial stability for myself. And I think part of that is, just my parents were figuring things out too. And so it was just natural that they didn't have a lot of knowledge to pass on to me. And, I always felt really lost around finances, but it wasn't until I came into the financial planning profession in 2010 that my eyes were opened, and I really saw that there was so much knowledge out there, and there was so much that I had to learn, and I wanted to find a way to bring that to people that were like me.
And, it's no secret that our industry still doesn't have enough people that look like you, right? Tell us about what made you think to yourself, I'm going to go into financial services and advise people.
Yeah, it was very happenstance. I always joke that like I had no idea this was even a job up until like after I graduated college, and I came into it through my first job out of college, and I really, I just felt like my personality, I'm a problem solver. I like to help people. I like to, look at different pieces of a puzzle and figure out how it all worked together. And all of that kind of led me to this profession, and I think it's a good fit for my personality and then my skills. That I have. I'm good at math too, so that doesn't hurt.
Hmm. So let's get the obvious out of the way, right? So the question is going to be like, why only show millennials of color and women, especially? Like, why not include other people? How fair is that? Tell us a little bit about, why focus in?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think given that I spend so much time doing what I do, right? Working, I wanted to do something that I found interesting. And, I'm a millennial woman of color. I find it really interesting and challenging, with people are in this season of life and they're hitting their stride in their career, but they have some kids and they might have some debt and they have all of these goals and they're trying to figure out the best way to set up their finances to lead to long-term financial success. And the question about, is it fair or is it biased or, it's funny because the wealth management industry completely ignores this segment of the population. So it's like, well, if everybody else is not talking to these people, I don't think it's unfair for me to be the one talking to them. um,
Touche, touche.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we know that they focus generally on people with large portfolios, and that's not necessarily, I mean, most 30 and 40-year-olds don't have very large portfolios, period. But
Yeah.
that's even more exacerbated for communities of color.
Yeah. Get a little closer to your mic because your mic is going in and out. But so let's get some of the stats sort of out of the way. So these are real gaps, and no doubt whether you cut it by assets in terms of wealth gap between rich individuals versus people who are more economically challenged, or whether you're looking at it through the gender gap, it still remains an 80-100 sort of like equation in terms of, how the gap exists. And that is further exacerbated, back to your point about populations that are either Black or Hispanic, and women. And then when you look at leadership, right, the representation in leadership is also, it thins out as it gets higher. And then, even if you look at it through other lenses, and we have some stats here on sort of wealth gaps through other ways, tell us how you turn this, like what seems like an insurmountable societal structural block, if you will, because one person arguably can feel overwhelmed by that, right? It's somebody else's large policy problem to fix, right? How do you make it smaller so you can widen the tent of financial wealth building for individuals who belong in this group?
Yeah, I always say like those issues are, while I'm aware of them, they're above my pay grade, right? So I am focusing on making the concrete changes person by person that can lead to a more solid financial foundation and building wealth. And I know, based on my personal experience, but also just dealing with my clients, that when women, and particularly women of color, like we are so often so very family oriented that like when I help one woman get her finances together, that's a ripple effect, right? And so, if I can create as much impact on the individual level, my hope is that that spreads out and touches way more lives than I'm personally speaking to.
Not everybody appreciates that narrative that you just said. When you help the woman in the financial situation, it helps a village, right? It helps the broader.
Mhm.
Give us a concrete example of how you have advised and helped people in your client base that you've seen sort of this echo effect on either their immediate family or their community.
Yeah. In particular, I think I have one client who, she's just like a beautiful person, but she has adopted some extended relatives, and she's a single woman, and by helping her, and she's lifting those people up. She is really like the matriarch of a family, even though she's relatively young. And so by helping her, I see I'm helping her adopted family and then also their children in a way that is very I can see the impact there, right? Like as she is able to say, I'm financially stable and I feel comfortable in my finances and I've established that foundation, now I'm able to better help these other people as well.
Yeah. Let's dig into that because I think that this is a challenge that happens a lot for people who come either from economically challenged families when they're the first, right? They could be like 17th generation American, but they
Yeah.
could be the first that went to college or to get their degree in higher education, or it could be because they're first generation, right? The first. Let's just call them the first.
Yeah.
The firsts have unique challenges, both real ones and psychological ones. Let's dig into that a little bit. Like, what have you found about your customers who are the first, which I assume are many among them,
Yes.
in terms of, for instance, how they choose between building wealth for themselves versus giving away to family?
Yeah, I would say that they often defer to giving it all away and helping to their own detriment. I see that time and time again. You know, and I think a lot of the ways that pressure manifests is in guilt. Guilt in keeping something back for themselves. And I can say that leads to them putting themselves in a compromised financial position oftentimes.
Yeah.
They give it all, and then when they need help, there's nobody there to help them, and so it's
Mm,
like the house of cards come crumbling. And a lot of the work I do is talking to clients about making sure that they are set. It's not selfish to make sure that they are set, because the reality is if something happens to them, then later on down the line, nobody's there to help them or everybody else once they're not around.
yeah.
Um,
No,
it's
so
it's
true.
it's
So
a
true.
mindset shift.
Yeah, it's true. And it's sort of like people focus on leaning on the strongest, and when the strongest falls, then it's really hard for the rest,
Yeah.
right? We've got here some of your life hacks in front of us, and I'm actually going to not go one by one, but I'm just going to, you say pay yourself first, right? And I think it relates to this topic we talked about, the firsts and how they're challenged with being
Yeah.
able to pay themselves first, whether that's, the reality of the money being needed or guilt, right? I know, I'm sure you can relate. I've felt the guilt. I'm one of the firsts, right? And so how do you help your clients psychologically be comfortable with paying themselves first?
I think we do a lot of mindset work. I think, like I said, reminding them and that when they're solid, that helps everybody else. But I think also just putting the numbers to things is really important. So showing them longer range projections. Let's say keeping in mind some family support and some of these other dynamics that I know are oftentimes inevitable. By showing them those real financial projections, I can say, okay, if you dial back the support and let's say invest that money or make sure that you have a what I like to call I don't have to deal with this fund instead of an emergency fund. You know, but by doing those things first and then setting guardrails around the support and making sure that it's still built in so that you don't feel extreme guilt. I think by showing the concrete numbers, that really drives home that they'll be in a better position in the future as long as they put a little bit of a guardrail around those things.
I like that. So almost like, back to your second point of bucketing. Maybe
Mhm.
one of my buckets is the help family bucket. So it doesn't always feel like it's depleting the core that I can keep building.
Mhm.
Is that kind of what
Yeah,
you mean by the bucket approach also?
absolutely. Absolutely. So, I generally advise clients to do one of two things, but they need to have some kind of boundaries around it. I would say either saying that there are certain people that I'm going to help no matter what, which I think is a little bit more generous, but or just saying I have a dollar amount that I'm going to do every year and I'm going to put that aside. And when that money's gone, it's gone, and I'm not going to dip into the rest of it. I think it can be very helpful to have that mental accounting done so that it there's not that uncertainty and feelings of instability that come with you have one pot and therefore everything has to come from there and you're not sure if it's enough for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve long term.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And what other ways have you found bucketing uniquely valuable to this segment of the population that you are advising?
Yeah, I think because a lot of us are newer to this traditional wealth management financial planning field, we have a different approach to finances. So, we will just have a general savings account and everything comes from there, right?
Yeah.
Think of investing as buying a property, not necessarily building a portfolio. And so I think that having that separation can be helpful for kind of concretely tying things to specific goals. And by by outlining and concretely tying things to those goals, it allows people to see the method to the madness, so to speak,
Yeah.
the reasoning behind it, and to track progress in a better way. Like I said, I was raised, you have a savings account, yes, but like you just throw the money in there and that's for everything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to shift. By the way, guys, we can get rid of the screen so I can see her lovely face. But I'm going to shift now to the concept of sort of how, when you see your story, even in something as subtle as somebody advising you on money, when that person sees your story, how that actually can change your mental framework about thinking that you belong in that space, right? Like, I give this subtle example for people a lot where, when we were designing financial planning programs before in my prior work, just saying, just having the right pronouns in there, suddenly like it just lifts people's ability to be like, oh, okay, I belong here. And therefore they lean into it even more. How have you found by bringing people's stories in, whether it's the know-how they're bringing in or just feeling validated, that it has empowered them?
Well, I think having an example is helpful, right? They say that all the time in having it in your career, right? Having somebody that comes from a similar background as you can be very motivating, and it can introduce the idea that you can achieve that. And I think similarly from a financial planning and a wealth management space, seeing someone who has the knowledge that looks like you and understands your challenges on a really granular level, like because I've lived them, or my husband has lived them, or friends or clients have lived them, and I see firsthand those challenges. I think that's really powerful. That representation, I think until you really see it,
Yeah.
as soon as you see it, you really feel the importance of that and just how that can really impact somebody. Because if they say all the time, like I didn't know that somebody could make $500,000 a year until I knew somebody that made $500,000 a year. I
Yeah.
didn't know that a regular person like me could have $1 million portfolio until I knew that somebody else had done it. And so I think that reflection is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's often said it's hard to be what you don't see, right? And I think that's
Mhm.
what you're sort of articulating. Tell us a little bit more about other life hacks that you have found to be really valuable among your client base.
Just generally speaking, I think um, automating your finances is really important. I think that, you get caught up in life and life passes you by. And if you are not in the habit of saving and investing, then setting things up automatically is a real game changer. Like you'll look up one day, years from now, and be like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
That's a lot more money than I thought before. I think that is is really impactful, and it seems really like small, but
Yeah.
it has a real long-term impact.
Do you employ the sort of the set it and forget it logic in some parts of your customers' portfolios? Like studies we've done show that, folks who have really managed to build and accumulate some wealth, doesn't mean they can get to retire, but wealth to supplement them over, during their slowing down years, that you often find the root is either because family knew how to do this or somebody knew how to do this, but also that they created these small habits that were like invisible to them. Back to your bucket
Mhm.
construct. Do you ever sort of employ the sort of set it and forget it mechanism in your advice to your customers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I am a big proponent of start somewhere. And I think a lot of times, in particular in our communities, because we're not as used to investing, we think we have to have a large sum of money in order to begin investing. Like I have to have saved $10,000 and then I can put that there. Well, that's a lot of money. And depending on your income and your expenses and your financial habits and your financial obligations, that can take a very long time to get there. Whereas, we were Lindsay was talking about earlier, the power of compounding, right? So if you are starting small, even if it's $100 a month or $50 a month, that adds up a lot over time. I think that is one thing. And training the clients that is long-term money is very important. Besides that too, I think I'm a big proponent of index investing, of passive investing. I think it is the long-term path to success for most people that don't want to actively monitor a portfolio. And so
Mhm.
that is a bit of a set it and forget. We'll come up with your asset allocation and your goals at the front end, and then obviously we'll monitor as time passes. But we don't need to fool around too much with that, because the reality is that you're going to end up doing yourself more harm than good by touching your portfolio too much.
Yeah, no, for sure. Tell me, shifting gears a little bit on sort of just you and how you bring, one of the things that's fascinating for me is like when I go to different environments, my own, so I'm originally from Ethiopia, but I'm a naturalized US citizen. Woohoo! But the thing that's interesting is like my story is not always common when I'm sitting around at dinner tables, right? In
Yeah.
terms of what I talk about and who I look like and what I do. And it's always around me, the fact that I am an other with this story, right? How do
Mhm.
you, I'm curious to know how you navigate, whether it's family gatherings or otherwise, when you talk about what you do, and do people try to get advice from you right then and there, or do they just be like, I'm curious how you navigate your otherness, if you
Um,
will.
I think it's more of I think the financial services industry has a bad rep. So I think when I tell people that I manage money, they're like, oh, I'm gonna change the subject. Or like when people ask me, like, what do you do? And I say I'm a financial advisor, they're like, oh, did you see the weather? That was weird there. They just don't want to deal with it because it has this like icky salesy type of reputation, which is not my personality at all. But or it can feel really overwhelming and they don't want to ask me questions because I think we're really self-conscious about our lack of knowledge, and
Mhm.
therefore like we just don't want to ask questions for fear of sounding dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. I've started this new thing. I don't know if you do this with my younger relatives, where I might have like a half hour coaching session with them, where it's sort
Mhm.
of like just trying to bring in some of those basic financial footprint things you need to do when you start out. And it's
Yeah.
been so gratifying because I think one of the things that's really hard in this world where justice and equality feels like it's so big. It's like we forget that we should just, if we all individually also just make it smaller and impact one life at a time, it has such a humongous impact. I know that's what happened to me. Somebody
Yeah.
invested in me. And so therefore I'm here, right? So, or many somebody's invested in me. Um,
Mm.
Tell me about, so we've been talking about sort of seeing your narrative in whoever is providing you that service and how empowering that is, right? Now I'm going to flip the script a little because I'm going to ask you how somebody who has a completely different narrative than you, a different background, and what you've gotten out of that engagement in the context of financial planning. I have a story to share with you, but I want to hear yours.
Okay. Um, wow. I mean, I have to say that it was very shocking for me my first few years in the business. I don't have a specific instance, but I think my first few years were very shocking when I saw people with $50 million in a portfolio and I was like, what? And they're not famous celebrities. They're just
Hmm.
somebody with that nobody knows, but they happen to have $50 million. That was so shocking to me, and it really opened my eyes to the whole world that was out there. And it it made me feel like that was possible for me in a way that I had never like even dreamt of long term, you know?
Yeah.
Like prior, like I just never, it's like my eyes just opened.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so interesting because on the one hand, many people's stories are not told in our industry. So one of the reasons I do stuff like this and shows like this is because I want to keep telling people like every bit of belongs here. This is way too important. Wealth building and investing is way too important to not open the doors wide and teach people how they can do it and get a slice of what they can to accumulate their wealth. So I think it's really important to focus on narrative, but I also try very hard, it's something I struggle with to also remember to remind people that you don't have to be the other person to completely relate with them, right? Like I always tell this joke of like one of my favorite mentors was a Caucasian older man who was a country club member and loved golf. And he and I just got each other and had nothing to do with our identity. So I think one of the things I'm trying to always talk about is like there is a way to make room for people to tell their stories, but then also be able to connect to one another as people, right? So it's a cool time we're in our industry.
I think so too. I think that's very accurate.
So you had talked about earlier about how people think that investing is so inaccessible, right? And either that's a psychological barrier or a financial barrier, right? Because there are other things that call on their pocket. But I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's important for people to understand how much of the playing field has leveled these last 10, 15 years, right? In terms of access. So whether it's a brokerage account you can open with $0 or a robo that you can open with $100 or less, that you're being charged a de minimis amount of fees on, commission-free trading that started. There's just like this revolution of access. Now, it doesn't mean everybody can afford it in terms of what's in their pocket, but talk a little bit about how you encourage people to just come into this thing now, and because the barriers are so much lower.
Yeah, that is very true. I was just thinking earlier that, when I got started, trades were like $50 to $100 per security, and now most firms have zero trading or it's like next to nothing, right? I think we have to. I like to remind people that investing outside of a retirement plan at work can be more like that, right? So you can kind of take little chunks at a time every 2 weeks or every month and throw that into something very simple like a suite of mutual funds or a suite of ETFs. There are robos out there that are giving people this unprecedented access to markets, and this way to kind of just check a box and you're able to you're just able to have the money invested and you don't have to think about it anymore. And I think that is really impactful. So I encourage pretty much everybody I talk to that they need to set up an investment account, however it may be. And there are all kinds of things like acorns, right? Where, not to endorse any specific products, but there are these things out there that, sweep $5 out of your account every day or once a week. And that can be a really impactful start. So I'm like with my bullhorn out here telling everybody.
Yeah. How has your practice and your approach been impacted by what we're living through now? What COVID environment has accelerated or, sort of harmed?
Yeah, I would say it's done two things that have been really powerful. One, I mean, because I operate on a virtual practice, everybody's online now. So it's allowed me, I think, to market myself a lot easier. But on a client level, I think it's really forced people, whether they've been impacted directly in terms of their employment because of COVID or not, I think it's forced people to really take a hard look at their finances. And I think that's a positive thing. I am all for people being more armed with information around their own personal finances, because I think it just is much more empowering and it relieves a lot of anxiety. But I see a lot of clients reassessing spending and reassessing their goals, particularly, which I think is not, I mean, it can be harmful. A lot of them are looking at moving more to cash, or increasing their savings account balances because they're concerned about their long-term job security, or just security in the economy in general, because this is something that came out of left field and just surprised all of us.
Yeah. And how do you, in terms of sort of your clients, best practices that you do, are you familiar with the movement FIRE?
Yes.
Do you utilize, first of all, let's just explain for the audience what FIRE is. So it is a mechanism and I would say best practices and a set of use cases, sort of best practices and community at large that helps people gain financial independence to be able to retire early if possible. But I think now that retire early has become sort of, do something early, whatever that is, right? Whether it's retiring or slowing down or following your passion and not necessarily doing the job for paycheck, right? Tell us how you think FIRE and some of its either community aspects of it or their tools is actually quite useful for folks who've not been involved in financial investing as much.
Yeah, I think I am very familiar with FIRE. When I first heard of FIRE, I was like, "This is crazy! How can people save 70% of their income?" Like, I live outside the DC area, so that is like an impossible feat, right?
Yeah.
In major metropolitan areas. But I think, going back to your point earlier about people being first, right? That is a really lonely space to be. And so FIRE has this whole incredible community around it. Now, granted, it's not a very representative community, but I think that's changing now. There are all kinds of blogs like Rich and Regular. I don't know if you've heard of that. They are, they're a Black couple. I think they live in Georgia and Atlanta, and they talk about their path to FIRE. But I think this community can be so helpful. And when you are the first person to pursue the path to building wealth, or, in a meaningful way, it can feel really lonely, and there can be a lot of self-doubt and a lot of insecurity around, like, am I crazy? Why am I doing this? Nobody else is doing this. And so you might not have that support from your network, your close network. But I think it's really important for people of color to pursue financial independence. I read a quote once, and it said, all the problems you think are social problems are economic problems with social consequences. And that really struck me. And I was like, think about how many people would be better off if they had some money. And not to say that money is everything, but it provides a level of security and stability. And it means you're kind of protected from a lot of things that you wouldn't be if you had less of it. So I think for community of color, because we have this huge wealth gap, it can be a really meaningful tool.
Yeah. And how empowering it is to also figure out how to carve out that piece of wealth for yourself. I mean, one of the things that I find really, I used to be a financial advisor too. And one of the things that I found really amazing about getting on the path to financial independence, not necessarily it's not a destination, right? Is how incredibly empowering it is for the next step you take, and how liberating it can be. So it's a very noble profession that you're in my opinion. Tell me a little bit about, let's flip a little to sort of how in your culture or where your upbringing was, were there anything unique sort of best practices that you've brought into your practice? Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. In Ethiopia, we have this thing called, we used to have this thing called kubo. And it basically was like a mechanism where the community or a small set of family members or whatever would put money in a pot and it would come around, right? And then when it came around, you ended up paying either for your children's school stuff or their clothes, whatever it was, but it was a means of accumulating wealth periodically. And I loved kubo, and I'm sure it still happens. And tell me a little bit about sort of what practices from your cultural background that you brought into financial planning.
That's an interesting one. I don't know that I have an answer off the top of my head, but I do know that in Gambia we have something called susu, which is like similar thing. a group of people, they put money together and it kind of circulates whenever there's a need, and everybody has their turn. And you can borrow against your turn as well if you have a need before you're up. I mean, I would say the one thing my culture is like very family oriented and very much about the community and the communal well-being. So I really encourage clients to continue that. I think a lot of the traditional financial advice is, you know, based on the individual. And I think that's important. We talked about that at length already, but at it centers on the individual and never takes into account the communal aspect. And I think that's where a lot of people of color, when they seek this traditional financial advice, they kind of run up against that barrier. So I've made it a point to make that to really prioritize that with my clients and make sure that it is built into their plan.
Yeah. And what do you think about in terms of inclusion? You know, there are folks, and we see some statistics in front of us here around the difference between unemployment and between race or and other factors, especially further exacerbated, obviously, during COVID because of the kind of jobs so many people of color find themselves in. Right? How do you answer the question when people say, "Well, why not?" Millennials are all going through that. They're all just getting started. They have no wealth. What's the distinction between of color and a millennial in the sense that they're both just getting started? And give us a sense of sort of why the distinction there, as in terms of focusing on millennial of color rather than millennials.
I think we have some of the same challenges, but I think that for communities of color, we are all either always in this there's a lot of talk about the sandwich generations, right? Like Gen X kind of being forced to take care of their kids and then also support parents. I think communities of color are oftentimes always sandwich generation, right? And so whether we are providing support right now or we are bracing ourselves financially or mentally to be able to provide that support in the future, I think that like it's just a reality for us. And so, you know, your average millennial, like white millennial or a more affluent millennial might not have any money right now, but they might not be ever faced with the prospect of having parents or grandparents or siblings that they have to materially support on an ongoing basis and having that be a drag on their finances. It's just a different level of pressure, I think, that they don't have to face.
So true. So true. I mean, it is hard to talk generality because every individual story is unique, but there's no doubt about it. There's a trend here and it's not ignorable. I mean, I remember when I first graduated from undergrad, getting cash off my credit card to send home as remittance, you know? And I mean, that's just the reality of being that forever sandwich that you're talking about. Which, you know, and I think, again, the more we talk about it, the more people will say, okay, you can still be this person and still pursue wealth through investing. Indeed, it is true. Tell me a little bit about let's go into some fun facts right now. What was your first security that you bought?
Oh gosh. So my brother-in-law is big in investing, and my sister is much older than me. So I was probably 19, going to college and living with her and my brother-in-law. And he made me set up a share builder account with my like little work study account. And I'll credit Edward for that. He's very helpful. And I think I bought Petrobras, I bought McDonald's, and there was another one. And so I bought into those three every month.
And then what was your first sort of time really applying asset allocation to your own wealth and not just simply securities?
I would
diversification.
That was probably, I was about 4 years out of college. I was recently married at the time, and my husband and I, he has his 401k, I have my 401k, and we opened up, a joint brokerage account. And I think that was the first time that I had to figure out how to do all of this across these different accounts that weren't in the same place. And it was a bit of an experience, to be honest.
Are you your family's financial planner, or do you use somebody else? You are.
I am. Yeah. I am. So I do it all. My husband's always, I've floated the idea of hiring somebody, and he's like, well, isn't that what you do? We have a financial planner on call 24/7.
Yeah. You're like, that's what I do in the daytime. Can I get a break? Yeah. No, I am also. So I feel it. Do you ever do group sessions that are, so when is your practice typically just one-on-one, or do you like teach families, or how do you do your sessions?
So I generally, if the client is married, I am insistent upon both spouses being involved in the conversation. It's very important to me. I haven't yet done any group, like extended family meetings, but I am actually looking at creating a space for women of color to come together and talk about finances together. So, that'll be later this year, but it is something that I think is very important because it goes back to that community and that feeling alone conversation that we were having earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to encourage our listeners here to start sending their questions, because I'm sure they have more questions than I do, and better ones for sure. So please do send your questions, and we'll be reading them out loud here and asking Anna about them. So tell me a little bit, Anna, about what was your breakthrough moment in entering financial planning and financial advice? Like when you felt
breakthrough.
Like, I can't do this. And suddenly, boom, you were like, I could do this.
Yeah, I hit my stride, and I would say that really was to the credit of my boss. He was my boss for about 3.5 years, and I had already been in the business for a while, but he was very instrumental in putting me in front of clients and, telling me, like, you clearly know what you're doing and you clearly have the technical knowledge. There's no reason why you can't also go in front of clients and present that, and really take charge of the planning process beginning to end, obviously with some input from him, but he was very instrumental. And I think after about a year of his incessant prodding and pushing, I really felt that I got this.
Good for you.
Hey, Anna, this is Lindsay. I'm just jumping in because you guys are having such a great conversation, but we're running out of time, and I want to make sure we get to some of the questions from the chat box, because there are a ton. You kind of answered right there Mama's question about how do you find spaces to break into the finance industry, especially as a Black millennial woman of color. I'm passionate about private equity, and I usually struggle finding people who are like me. So I think both of you can probably answer that question. Anna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, and I'm so sorry, I don't see the questions on my side, so I'd be pumping them out if I could. But go ahead, Anna, take it away.
I would say it is very difficult, but there are some associations, like there's Quad A, which is this American Association of African American Financial Advisors. I don't know about the particular private equity space, but I think it's unfortunately going to be on you to find those people, because the financial services industry is not particularly diverse. I think there are some firms like Raymond James, for example, that are doing a really good job of really marketing to potential Black and brown employees, but it's an uphill battle, and we're at the beginning stages.
Yeah. And I would say, I feel like social media has totally transformed this, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like in the old days, you'd have to find out where these organizations are, but now you could just pump in, a question in Twitter and find several folks who are in financial services, and you can actually disintermediate it, because it doesn't have to be part of an institution anymore, right? Because they're just people like Anna, people like they're creating movements around them. And I actually think that that's where the future of the network is going to be, is these sort of regular people that create movements and networks around them. So, I mean, I can guarantee you, if you follow Anna or me and looked at who follows us and we follow, you'll already find like half the network you need to. And I think that's actually really true of any people that are trying to break in to something, is that if you rely just on institutional connection points, it's really hard, right? But if you try to find ways where the rules have been sort of leveled a little bit more, which social media definitely does that. Another is, obviously, there's some really interesting conferences that I love that that you can go to that really break apart sort of what this industry is about. I don't have as much knowledge about the conferences on private equity area, but again, tons of organizations. If you are interested in also joining associations, like if you have an alumni association, I guarantee you that they have some alumni group that is focused on that. And I definitely think that's another really good starting point, because there's a generational commonality you'll find in your alumni network that also helps.
And just on the back of that comment, Lule, Red Door Financials asks, are you aware of any specific organizations that promote financial literacy within communities of color in an effort to reduce the wealth gap?
Yeah, none that stand out to me right now, but there are tons of them. Lindsay, you serve on one of them, obviously. But there are organizations that do this well. I do think, though, what we're talking about today is also empowering people to not only go to organizations, but to actually go to the suchandsuchcompany.com and research it. Like, I'm basically calling out the call to be like, don't rely on institutions to disintermediate this for you, because this thing has been flattened. It's now up to us to go and research. So I don't know organizations offhand right now, but I'm happy to share them later. But more than anything else, I could not say this more. Research this through social media, or just going to the .com of financial institutions, whether that's Ally or any other institution that you have, and you will find that you don't need an intermediary as much as you think you do.
That's the truth for many people. And I think you're right, absolutely right. If people go out and follow you and Anna on social media, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, you're going to learn a lot just by following these two really smart ladies. Latoya asks, do you have any suggestions on how to break through the mental, emotional barriers our Black community and those in poverty have about money? You can't get them to open a bank account or save. How do we get them to think about investing if they're not going to do that basic first step?
Yeah, very good question. Anna, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it is a hard one. I think there is a lot of stuff out there on money mindset and improving people's relationship with money, which I think is important. There's a book called Scarcity and Money, which I think is very important, and it was very impactful for me. But at the same time, that space is very has a lot of privilege kind of interwoven in it, and it's not so necessarily impactful. There is somebody I know who just wrote a book. Her name is Eugenie George. You can she follows me on Twitter. I follow her. She's amazing. And she just wrote a book. I think it's called Our Money Stories, and it talks about really dissecting our relationship with money to have better financial practices.
Yeah, I actually heard that podcast of yours. That was an awesome podcast. I would actually encourage people to listen to it as well.
Just a couple more questions. We're coming up on time. Anna, about your business, do you only work with millennials? If not, can you recommend someone that would work with baby boomer women of color? Do you work with men? There's a couple. I'm just combining a couple questions here. Yeah. And what is the average income bracket of your clientele? So we've got Donna, Latoya, and Melvin asking those questions.
Sure. So I do work with anybody. I mentioned before, I have lots of married couples as clients. So, obviously there's usually a man involved there. I don't have any gay couple clients, but whatever. Anyway, I do, generally speaking, work with millennials. The oldest age of my clients is somewhere around 50, mostly because I think I'm more focused on the cash flow and wealth building stages. But I certainly, there are lots of people out here And if people want to follow me on Twitter, I can probably DM some recommendations based on the particular situation, and give them some folks that I think are doing a good job in that space too.
All right. And then Karina, to follow up on that, she says, we're thinking about hiring a financial planner, but we don't have a lot of money to start with. What are your thoughts on waiting till we're able to put more money aside? In other words, what's a good time to start working with a financial planner?
I would say, and actually I realized I neglected to answer a portion of the previous question. Average tax income of my clients is, I'd say, 75,000 to 400,000, somewhere around there. But I think I don't think that you have to have a lot of money to work with a financial planner. There are a lot of people that I think have a lot of complexity to their situation in terms of debt management, or they really want somebody to work with them in terms of their financial habits, and that can be very helpful. I think the traditional wealth management industry is going to want you to have a large portfolio before they'll even talk to you. But there are a lot of people out there like me that are working with people that are starting or kind of earlier on their journey, and they might not have amassed significant wealth already.
Great. Well, we're at time. Lule, I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thanks for hopping in and showing us some of those questions. Anna, thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories and your pearls of wisdom with us. I highly encourage everybody to follow Anna on social media or other places. And as I said, it's a place where you can find a lot of thought leaders who are doing some really interesting things in investing in large, and how to bring that broader family of folks into investing that have not typically benefited from it. I feel really strongly that telling story is one of the ways we welcome people into this landscape. So thank you, Anna, for sharing your story.